Hi, good afternoon. I'm Gail Sylvia, your host, and you're watching Sylvia Global Media Network. I'd like to welcome back China Galland, an amazing author, professor, filmmaker, and activist for social justice. China Galland is also the leader of an incredible piece of work that affects all of us, locally and globally, and that's Love Cemetery, Unburying the Secret History of Slavery. And it's that book, which was published in 2007, is in its final stages of being made into a movie, Resurrecting Love, Love Cemetery. China Galland, thank you so much for being here on Sylvia Global again today. How are you?
Well, I'm delighted to be here and very grateful to you and your team and to everybody that's come on, that's agreed to join us and speak up on behalf of Resurrecting Love, which is the documentary. Thank you, one and all.
China, talk to us about why this topic and what is the status of the film that's so important for our viewers to be aware of.
Well, let me back up just for a second, Gail. Thank you for introducing me as the leader, but I'm hardly the leader. I'm the follower trying to catch up to this remarkable community of descendants in East Texas, in this small African-American community that my family started a nursery business raising peaches in 1903. They moved down from Chicago. So this is a place and a group of people, some of whom I've known off and on all my life. And in the 80s, I discovered Wiley College, the historically black college there in Marshall. And
most people know it from the film, The Great Debaters, with Denzel Washington.
Denzel Washington, Nate Parker.
Nate Parker, yeah.
Who's gone on to become our executive producer, which is very exciting. Jernese Smollett, Forrest Whitaker, an extraordinary film that came out not long after the book came out. And the story of the Great Debaters is in the book, because that's part of the local history if you're familiar with the place. But what happened was simply that I was introduced to a remarkable older woman, Mrs. Nuthall Britton, who was introduced to me as the Keeper of Love. Well, that's a rather arresting way to be to be titled. And it was my friend, Mrs. Doris Vidito, who's president of the Love Cemetery Burial Association, that introduced me to Mrs. Britton. And between those two, I got into all kinds of trouble and ended up corralling a young filmmaker to come with us and being shown the cemetery and beginning. I just knew this was an extraordinary story that deserved more than simply a book, that it deserved to be documented, and that's really the purpose, my purpose is not leading, but being a witness, documenting, finding out what it means to be an ally and support Mrs. Britton and Mrs. Vidito especially over the last 10 years in reclaiming this historic 175-year-old beautiful African-American cemetery marked, deeded with gravestones that the community had become landlocked and locked out of. Starting in the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement, the community was locked out for 40 years by the time I was introduced to Mrs. Britton.
So the documentary actually tells the story of two women, one who's black and one who's white, in a racially divided community, and the battle against corporate interests and the efforts to reclaim Love Cemetery and to fulfill a mother's dying wish. Who was the mother that had the dying wish?
That was Doris Vidito's mother. Doris's mother, because that community was locked out for so many years of their own cemetery. I mean, everybody in the world wants to honor their loved ones and the dead.
Everyone.
So this was the problem here was pretty obvious initially. But Mrs. Vidito's mother, before she died, had wanted to get back into Love Cemetery and clean her mother's and her family's graves. And she couldn't do that. And it made her enormously sad. And Doris promised her that she would get back in and clean the cemetery if there was any humanly possible way that she could.
Well, also joining us today is the associate producer of the film, Resurrecting Love, the Cemetery That Can Heal a Nation, and her name is Danielle Burnett. Danielle Burnett is also working on her PhD in clinical psychology with an emphasis on research studies in African American individuals and families and healing generational trauma associated with slavery and using therapy as a part of that experience. Danielle Burnett, thank you so much for being here with us today. How are you?
Doing well, and thank you for having me. Really excited to
Absolutely an
be.
honor. It's quite
Yeah.
an honor. Talk to us about the road to love. And I know that's part of a spoken word presentation that you recently did with Drew, who's joining us here today, and we'll be talking to Drew shortly. But talk to us about what drew you to this project and why it is so important to you.
For sure, absolutely. I'm a daughter of Texas. I'm a descendant, first generation in California, actually. But every other part of my family has been from Texas as far back, really, as anyone can go. And we can trace our roots in Texas back to 1815, which is a blessing. And when I heard the story, I was really interested because it was set in East Texas, and my mother is from Fort Worth, Texas, and just knowing the history of African Americans in this country and how often hidden and shadowed the details of our history are, it was important for me to just learn as much as I could about the project. And so when I heard about China's book, Love Cemetery, I immediately was able to get a copy, and I gave it to my mother, who read it and loved it, and then just wanted to support China in any way that I could to really bring this work forward, because it is so imperative. The history of African Americans in this country is often riddled with question marks and unknowns and things like that. And here's a cemetery that had answers, that had a history, that people could go to and know who their ancestors were. And for me, that was the reason to get involved, to be able to have a hold on the history that is often fleeting for us here in this country.
What lessons are you learning from your involvement with the film that you're taking into your practice and your PhD program?
I would say that just really healing is about community. That healing is about being able to reconcile all of the different parts, to be able to really integrate them. And that is what's happening here with Love Cemetery, that we have a community that is very strong and independent and owns this land, and has had numerous obstacles in terms of being able to get in to really honor the ancestors, and having people who are from the community but maybe from a different racial background, a different class, social structure, are able to really come together and to work together to ensure that the descendants of the Love family have access to this cemetery. It's really just a lesson in how to love across difference, love across race, love across anything that we think separates us. And that's really what I bring forward into my work as a psychologist, a future psychologist, and just a budding clinician.
What's been the biggest challenge for you personally or emotionally, as you've been involved and learned more about the history and the challenges?
I would say it's personally, it's just the process of losing two grandmothers, really, while this is going on. Both of my grandmothers who were born in Texas, and just really wanting to give honor to them, even while I was there at Love Cemetery. But really, I don't necessarily think that it's difficult, but I think it's a joyful occasion to be able to go into the cemetery, because for the first time, it was the first time that I've ever been to a cemetery that was dedicated and filled with the lives and souls of people who were enslaved. And it was the first time that I got to say thank you, because I have been afforded a lot of opportunity in my life, opportunities that they fought for, that I was able to say thank you for once, and that to me has been the most powerful thing about being a part of this project. The history is so hidden, it's so buried, so seemingly inaccessible, particularly to a younger generation of African Americans who are coming up, maybe not connected with the South, don't really have much information about their histories in this country outside of the terror and the shame and all of that of slavery. But what we have is an opportunity to see that these individuals lived their lives, and that we can go and see their names and really see them as individuals instead of this big mass lumped group called slaves.
The history of Love Cemetery is actually a history that can be found throughout the world, and the power of the bones. China and I have talked about the bones, how they speak to us, really symbolizing that those that have gone before us, the spirit of their existence and the power of their influence, even in death and in the grave, still resonates throughout generations, and how it actually has a way of connecting us even in our dying, just as we want to try and realize in our living. So whether it's the Native Americans who have had similar experiences, or cemeteries such as this that are found in New England and places such as New Haven, Connecticut, right there near Yale. There's similar work. I mean, in Manhattan, they have found bones as well.
Yes.
And when I think about even in the Old Testament of the Bible and reading about the laying of the bones, the memorials established to honor and remember and tell the stories of those that have gone before us, and how it benefits us, generations later. And the power of that is something not to be underestimated. And I think that's also very significant about this film, and why the story needs to be told, that it's this local story that has this global impact and a global message.
Absolutely.
And the fact that there's such a diverse, ethnically diverse and gender diverse participation in bringing this story together is a way of uniting the generations and not allowing the history that caused these divisions to be where the story ended. That there's still more to be told, and that's what's so amazing. We also have, so we'll come back to you, Danielle, and thank you for those comments. We also have joining us today, I don't know if Ailey is here, Ailey Pope is on or not. We were trying to get her on. She's a student. I'm really curious about the next generation and how they view the importance of history such as this, and why or why not. And so as soon as Ailey's here, we'll bring her on. In the meantime, let's go to you, Tracy Gary. How are you, Tracy?
I'm great, Gail. Nice to see you.
Very, very nice to see you as always, Tracy. You and China have known each other since 1970, and China, just like you, has remained true, whether it's in her writings or her speaking and now in film, to social and racial justice. What was your personal experience, Tracy, that made this topic and your relationship with China so important?
Well, I actually was, I think most of us can identify and remember the moment where we saw a terrible injustice in our childhoods, and it was the first time that we spoke up for any reason. And for me, it was that I was raised by African American and Hispanic caregivers and sat on their beds watching Dr. King and seeing the terrible abuses that happened in Birmingham. So here we are actually celebrating 50 years of a really quite triumphant, amazing history of the civil rights movement and the struggles of everyone. And I was a young girl. I was 9 or 10 years old, but I knew that this was the worst thing that I had ever seen happen to people that looked like the caregivers and the loving people that had raised me. So I've been committed to social justice ever since. And when China actually began this project and told me about the project, I thought, this is just, it's not often that we see so blatantly, other than, of course, the terrible abuses of the number of African Americans and others that are given bars and not that is to say put behind bars and not given education and access. It's not often that we get to see daily violence and this kind of injustice. So this is a situation where injustice, people went to sleep on this and did not stand up in their neighborhoods to be allies. And the beautiful thing about this project is that people are coming forth of different generations, of different races and classes, and saying, hey, this is our community, this is our democracy, and everyone should have the right not only to their access to their ancestors, but we need to work together whenever we see this kind of injustice. So I've been very grateful for the participation of everyone on this project, and I'm a donor. I'm someone who decided to give a little money to support the project and to try to help raise some money. And I just think so often we sit in our living rooms or we sit at home, we're divided, and we don't actually stand up to say, hey, it's not okay for this to be happening anymore. We need to actually put our money in. We need to put our bodies on the line. We need to stand up and go to those marches. And we need, in this case, to really make sure in our own backyard that these examples of racial injustice and lack of access and lack of opportunity are not happening. And we as white, Caucasian, and other races are not, often stepping up in the way that I'd like to see us step up. Money is one way, but actually putting our hearts on the line for each other and opening up to the fact that if this were happening to our families and our beloveds, we would not be still. We've got to move on these things. And in fact, these are our family members. These are our ancestors. These are our relatives. We are one family. And it's extremely important for our own unity and our own commitment to democracy that we do everything in our power. I'm excited about this project because I think it's a great model that that will awaken people and will help people to really remember that, yes, really it takes the courage of our conviction to stand up. And this is an example of folks from different diversities and races and classes working together. And I think we need, it's a beautiful, beautiful, when you see some of the footage, you'll be so happy to see the participation of not only the older generation and the younger. And I think we have a lot to be proud of, but a lot more to do. So more models like this, I think, will catalyze more people to have that courage. And you're helping us get out there.
How do you distinguish, or how would you encourage someone else to be able to distinguish having courage associated with their convictions from white guilt, and feeling guilty about the history that they weren't directly involved with, and being able to move forward and understand the value and how rewarding it is for their own lives and their families to be able to have that courage? How do you distinguish, the two, or is there any distinction?
Sure, I think there is a lot of guilt from what just that is just unfounded, because they don't have relationships and friendships with people who are different than they are, and our country isn't fostering that enough. And so I think when we are guilty, we're looking back, or we're looking at our behavior and realizing the limits of it. It's a very sort of self-centered thing. When you're really there with your conviction and your love, you're really looking to support a future that is about co-creating a healthy, loving environment or set of opportunities to make the world a better place. It's really more of a collective experience rather than coming in, to your own narcissism and fear. And so for me, there's no choice here. We have, we have strayed and not stood up enough for each other, and I think that we've been made to be too separate. So projects like this, I think, enable us to deepen our friendships, get to know each other, build trust, build empathy, learn really from each other, listen very, very deeply about the history, and also about the passion that people feel from that, and the pain that people have felt from that kind of exclusion. And when you really, really listen to each other and each other's experiences, you realize, in my case, how utterly privileged I have been, but how touched and moved I am, and knowing that I have a chance to make a difference. And so giving my money to the San Francisco, Film Society, and being able to make a donation in honor of resurrectinglovemovie.org, or to the website, www.resurrectinglovemovie.org, and really calling up the project and saying, hey, how can I help? These are simple things for me to do, as well as to reach out to others to say, hey, you need to see this film and listen to, this YouTube video that'll just blow your socks off, that's in the film, to really hear how the next generation and how other people are beginning to feel about these social justice issues. It's an exciting time.
Tracy, a number of people know you as a philanthropic and legacy advisor, and I think that what you've just described is another way of unleashing generosity. And it's the time and the talent, along with the resources, and being presented with opportunities to really unleash the power of generosity and to be a recipient of what that means is to experience the power of some new friendships and having made a profound difference in history and changing the next course of history and being a part of that.
Well,
Tracy, thank you.
Thank you. I think it's about unleashing love, and the way we can do that is to move our money and really put it in the hands of people who really can, to think that only $100,000 left after hundreds of thousands of dollars and hours and people's time will enable this film to be seen all over the world. Everybody's $20 and $50 and $100, makes thousands of dollars. It makes, collectively, we get to be part of something greater than ourselves. There's no greater honor.
And it's really an honor. It's quite an honor. Well, Tracy, Gary, thank you so much for being here. If you have time, stay with us a little bit longer. We have some other wonderful people. And Drew, I just want to thank you for your patience standing by. Drew Dillinger, you are actually Dr. Drew Dillinger, and an internationally known speaker, poet, writer, teacher, and an amazing presenter of all that we hold near and dear to us associated with philosophy and religion. What is it about this project that has captured your heart and your attention?
Well, I'm so moved by the project on many levels. Of course, I have deep faith in the vision of China and the vision of Danielle, and I'm interested in Love Cemetery particularly and the constellation of issues that it brings together, because I'm interested in the past in general, but the reason why I'm interested in the past is because I'm interested in the future. And we can't know where we are and where we're going if we don't know where we've been and how we got here. And so looking at the history of systemic racism in the United States, looking at the history of class oppression, these are dynamics of the past that continue to live and function in the present. We can't understand our current political system if we don't know the history of systemic racism. We can't understand the current legal or the education system or the prison system if we don't understand the legacies of systemic racism. So I think in the same way that the civil rights movement was able to transform some of the legacies of the past into a new dawn of potential and possibility, that we are called to do the same thing in the present time. And particularly white people, as Tracy mentioned, have a particular obligation and responsibility to help dismantle the structures of white supremacy, white privilege, and systemic racism, in the same way that we're all called, whatever our gender, we're all called to work for gender justice and to work against sexism and patriarchy. I think all of us have a responsibility to work for racial justice and racial healing, and Love Cemetery is just such an important location of where the past and the present and the future are all converging, and I think it's an honor to be able to participate in some small way to this project as a part of a larger movement for building social justice, economic equality and ecological sustainability.
Was this sense of deep love and concern about social justice and being a part of social change instilled in you and as a part of your upbringing, or through a specific event at a stage in your life that really made a powerful and profound impression upon you?
It was a combination of both, I would say. I was definitely raised in the South, in North Carolina, as part of what we would see now as the first generation of integration. I started kindergarten in the early 70s, and the school system in Chapel Hill, North Carolina had only been integrated since 1966. We're talking about within a decade of the schools being integrated. I was in an integrated kindergarten classroom. So I think issues of race, issues of class were very much in the atmosphere as I was growing up. And as I got older and learned about the civil rights movement, watching documentaries such as Eyes on the Prize, and later as I began to teach courses on the civil rights movement and learn more about the young people particularly, that's one of the things I mentioned when I talk to groups of young folks around the country, is that young people have always been at the forefront of social change and social transformation. And of course that's particularly true in the civil rights movement. We could look at Claudette Colvin, who was 15 years old when she stood up on the buses in Montgomery and in fact inspired Rosa Parks to do the same thing 9 months later. Rosa Parks was a mentor of Claudette Colvin, but we often forget that it was a 15-year-old high school student who actually did the first protest that led to the historic Montgomery bus boycott. So I think young people have always played a role because of their vision, because of their heart, because of their courage that they have to hold on to their ideals. There's a certain genius of youth. And we need the genius of youth in projects like Resurrecting Love. So it's great to see the young folks at Marshall and the debate team get involved, and to see new generations, making their contribution to racial justice and racial healing in the U.S.
How do you incorporate this message into your poetry? You've been identified as a national treasure by Joanne Macy, a deep and courageous poet by Alice Walker. You've been on stage with a number of luminaries such as Danny Glover and Cornel West, and a lot of it is associated with the power of spoken word and poetry. How do you infuse those messages, your art form, with this message?
Well, I think the arts are very important in social justice work. It's once been said that there's not a movement unless it's found its expression in song. When the people make a movement their own, they spontaneously put the messages of the movement into song, into art, into poetry. So I've tried to use spoken word as a particularly powerful way of sharing a message, because I think the arts hit people on a deeper level than just debate or dialogue or discourse. The arts are able to kind of get in underneath people's defenses, and if we can use rhyme and rhythm and the memorable qualities of poetic speech, or if we can use humor, that these are very powerful ways to share a message and to share social justice issues in a way that really communicate across lines and connect with people on the heart and soul level. So I certainly try to weave my interest in ecology and social justice into my spoken word poetry.
Danielle, I know that you recently, that you and Drew know one another and have done some work together. Can you talk and respond to some of the comments that Drew has just shared as it relates to the arts and the power of spoken word and the art form in supporting, messages such as Love Cemetery and the work that's being done with this film?
Absolutely. Part of what got me into the field of psychology was the power of the arts. I started off as a writer and spoken word artist. Drew and I kind of coming up through the ranks in Oakland, which is a very powerful field for spoken word and poetry and things like that. And I was the 2003 Oakland Poetry Slam champion and used
Congratulations.
and used poetry and spoken word to be able to talk about social issues, social justice, race, class, oppression, all kinds of things. And so it really got, just seeing how it was able to transform me and to transform the audiences that I was talking to, I ended up getting into an expressive art therapy program, which was really about how we can use the arts to be able to engage in healing and social change, really. And then I often find that I communicate best through poem and spoken word and things like that. And so when China was doing her very first initial round of fundraising at an event that was actually hosted at Drew's home, I felt like I wanted to contribute something to this. And so what I did was just took everything that I had in terms of my own experience, talking to China about the project, about Love Cemetery, what was going on, the barriers that were being placed in front of the community as they tried to gain access. I took all of that and wrote the poem, The Road to Love. And it, again, has just this ability to cut across and cut in straight into the heart of many of the issues that are discussed. And it was my pleasure to be able to do this, because really the history of Texas is my history. It's who I am. It's where I'm from, and that this story in general, I mean, the ability to gain access, this is not a unique issue. That people are dealing with this all over the country. And so just to be able to write a poem that can speak to multiple experiences, because that's what really connects when using the arts. The arts are most powerful when you get a sense of universality, that you are able to tell a truth so true that it becomes universal.
Are you able to capture those elements in this film with the work you're doing with Drew and China?
Absolutely. That is what makes Love Cemetery and Resurrecting Love so incredibly important, is that this story is universal. This is about how people can come together. We definitely have this overarching issue of trying to gain access into this cemetery, but it is the personal stories of China and Doris and their friendship, and how they work through their friendship, through triumphs and through challenges that you see on film, that can be so inspiring in this film. And it really is a model and really sort of emblematic of what can happen when communities come together and have a particular cause to work for and towards. That common cause is what brings us together, and in this case, it's love. And really,
China,
all cases, it's love.
all cases. China, go ahead. You were going to say something?
Yes, I have to break in for just a moment here, because there's somebody who's not with us who is actually central to my relationship with Drew, and how I met Drew, I don't know how many years ago, how I met Danielle, and that's my son, who's the filmmaker. And he and Drew had gone to college together. And that's where I first met Drew, at Prescott College in Arizona. Let's give credit where credit's due. And then through Drew and Ben, who's an extraordinary filmmaker himself, Benjamin Galland, I got introduced to Danielle and to her husband William, who grew up with Drew. And so there's an incredibly rich personal story underneath the story of how this film is being birthed. And it was Drew's enormous generosity and ability to include others that gave us this very beautiful venue to have a benefit to raise funds for Love Cemetery, I think a year and a half, 2 years ago almost. And Nate Parker, our executive producer, was just about to be coming out with Lucas's last film on Red Tails, the Tuskegee Airmen, who were such an extraordinary story that inspired that film of George Lucas's. That was his last film. Well, Nate flew in to be with us and to be at Drew's home and to talk about Love Cemetery and why he called me up when he heard about it and said, what can I do to help? This is so important. Kids today are lost. We need to know our roots. This is what this story is about. I'm thrilled. What can I do to help? So that came about through what historically black Wiley College and Denzel Washington's film produced by Oprah on The Great Debaters, which is the true story of the 1935 debate team at Wiley, which is going to be redone October 25th at the University of Southern California. So to just give you a little glimpse of all the personal connections in here.
Well, you've done more than made a personal connection. You've actually shown geographically, generationally, artistically. I mean, you've cut through all of the intersections that really reaffirm the necessity and the power of the work that all of you are doing associated with Love Cemetery. And that's that we are all connected. It is all of our story. Yes. Yeah.
Just two quick points. Marshall, Texas is an unusual community because Wiley College was founded in 1873. So there was an intellectual part of the African American community that so many people didn't even realize existed. It was a rich black farming community as well as this community of educators. James Farmer came out of Wiley College. James Farmer Sr., second black PhD in the U.S., he was teaching at Wiley College. So I discovered this amazing black history. It's like there is these extraordinary achievements that people don't realize African Americans have already accomplished, what they've done against the enormous odds. Farmer Sr. walking to Boston from Florida to get his doctorate.
To get his doctorate.
It's been a gift and at the beginning of my education to be able to discover and create a platform and venue to honor these people. And that's how I met Ailey Pope, who may not be able to be with us, but this powerful young debater who joined with us in defense of Love Cemetery. It was the debate team who helped me step up because Doris and I were left to confront a large timber corporation in Marshall. Love is a tiny cemetery that the community owns, as Danielle said, but it's surrounded by giant stands of timber, a private hunting corporation, and so the logging road that many people have access to has been owned by different people at different times. And so it was how the state of Texas took up this cause. The Attorney General in Texas investigated when the book came out. The laws have been changed in Texas. That doesn't mean they get enforced. But it's a beginning. There is now, people have always had the right to have access to their cemeteries. However, crossing private land can be loaded. It has to be done in a particular way. And there are now fines and penalties if private property owners who have access are unwilling completely to give any access to a community. And that's what had happened, and that's what's been changing.
China, we may have to come back for an additional conversation, but in my experience, it's hard to separate African American history, slavery, and cemeteries without bringing up the discussion of spirituality and the role of the church, the power of prayer, the importance of faith, and how spirituality and faith has also played a role in uniting the community associated with the work of Resurrecting Love Cemetery. Can you speak to that briefly?
When Mrs. Britton and Mrs. Vidito took my son Ben and me out to see Love Cemetery, we had no idea that the gate would be left ajar, that we could get in. And we did. And Mrs. Britton, the elderly keeper of loves, her comment when a tree crashed out of the blue with no wind, her comment about the ancestors was so striking to me. I realized, and it gave me words to describe the fact that I stepped into another world. I stepped into the world of African American spirituality. I'd stepped into the world of the ancestors, which in my white community I didn't know that much about. I knew about my family ancestors, but I didn't have the very developed, complicated, and beautiful form that's come to us through the African and African American communities. The Native American people too, and there are people who are Native American and Black buried in this cemetery. And according to some of the older people, perhaps even Native Americans themselves. So nonetheless, what I saw was this spirituality I knew very little about. So I was a witness that inspired study and questions. Danielle can certainly, I think, address this more than me, but it was really, I started out with the faith community, asking spiritual leaders, Black and white, Protestant, men, women, Catholic, whatever, whoever, to come together and say, I don't live in Marshall, Texas. My family does. They've lived there since 1903. But I'm an insider outsider. It's not for me to come in and say, well, this should happen. So I asked the elders in the spiritual community, like, this is your town. What do you think needs to be done? And they agreed we needed to work together to open up love, because it's such an extraordinary metaphor for what we need to do all over the world, all over our society. Love is what is the answer, but it was Mrs. Britton saying, help me get back into love. I want to get there before I die. And
Thank you so much.
Thank
you so much, China.
You.
We have closing comments. Danielle, I'd like to come back to you and let you close us out. So I'm going to step over here very quickly to Drew and give Drew you an opportunity to share some closing thoughts with our audience.
Sure. Well, I just think that the story of Love Cemetery and the book and the film is an amazing opportunity for us to take the mantle from the civil rights movement and begin to ask ourselves, how can we advance the agenda of freedom, compassion, dignity, respect, fairness, equality in our time, in our generation. And so, I think, I take that legacy from the civil rights movement very seriously. There were people who risked their lives and risked their livelihoods so that we could have the transformed nation that we have today, and yet there's still so far we need to go. At the end of his life, Martin Luther King was talking about connecting the issues of racism, war, and poverty. And I think in our time we need to continue that work of connecting the issues. So connecting the issues of social justice, of economic justice, of ecological sustainability, of racial healing. And I think Love Cemetery is a story and a location where all of these issues converge. And so it's an honor to be able to support this film, and it's an opportunity for all of us to honor the ancestors, and to move forward rooted in a vision of the past, but determined to create a transformed society that puts justice at the center.
Dr. Drew Dellinger, thank you so much for being with us here today on Sylvia Global. Really also from my heart, thank you for your passion and your commitment through the years and the creative ways that you continue the legacy associated with the civil rights movement in reaching the next generation and engaging their voice, their work, and their talent. So thank you so much for being here on Sylvia Global.
Thank you.
Danielle Burnett.
Yes.
Associate producer of this wonderful movie, your closing comments and the important message that you'd like our audience to take with them when you are done sharing about this work.
Absolutely. Just that Resurrecting Love is about just the basic human rights that we all possess in needing to be able to honor and venerate our ancestors, those who came before us, who paved the way, and that this film is about human rights, racial reconciliation and healing, and really about telling the history, being very clear about the contributions of African Americans in this country, and really placing these contributions as important, and really highlighting the importance of the contributions of enslaved people in building this great nation. And then also about transferring this history and this knowledge to the next generation. It is no secret that many communities of color are in crisis. We have a cradle to prison pipeline that is taking young people out. And it is because they don't know where they come from. They have no history. And in order to know who you are, where you come from, develop a healthy sense of yourself and identity, it is important to know your history so that you don't repeat the mistakes, so that you can be able to take the lessons and really move them forward. And this is really a gift to all of the descendants.
It's quite an honor to...
And our educational system.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we need more people like you, Danielle Burnett, and everyone that's been on the show. And what can our audience do to support this film, China Galland? What can they do, and how can they reach you?
They can go to our website, www.resurrectinglovemovie.org. You can donate online. There's a little donate button. You can read the beautiful letter that Tracy wrote on our behalf. You can go to the hot links and see our letter of support and fiscal sponsorship from the nonprofit tax-exempt San Francisco Film Society, which we're honored to be sponsored by, so that you can make a donation through them to Resurrecting Love, project number 1218. They've got it all keyed in on their page. You just click a button. You can also see
a trailer there, a trailer on the
website. We
website.
have a lot of footage up. We have trailers on our website. You'll see Nate Parker, who flew out with his family for our celebration, and over 100 people, and Wiley trustees who discovered they have family buried in Love Cemetery, and members of the community. And then you'll see, you can go to YouTube where we have more footage, including Ailey Pope, who wasn't able to be with us, but it's absolutely...
We'll get her on. We'll get
her. You can see her live in Love Cemetery with Danielle and me last March, delivering the speech she gave all around the country and won 10 first-place prizes for
Yes.
on Love Cemetery and preserving African-American burial grounds and this history. She was graduating from Wiley. She's now at Southern Methodist University studying theology.
We're looking forward to having Ailey Pope join us. Thank you so much, all of you. I think that actually you're a reflection of the success and the significance of Resurrecting Love, because the mission has been accomplished by your presence and your voice, and we'd love to support you in getting that film out so that others can actually feel the power of what love can do in changing the world, and the significance of our history and the connection that all of us actually have. Thank you so much for joining us here today on Sylvia Global. I've been your host, Gail Sylvia. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Weatherby Asset Management is dedicated to providing exceptional wealth management services by forming partnerships built on trust, understanding, and thoughtful advice. For more than 20 years, they've been offering objective perspective, personalized planning, and sophisticated investment management to individual investors and families, as well as pension plans, foundations, and endowments. Contact them at www.weatherby.com. Weatherby Asset Management, located in San Francisco and New York City.